You are lying down, feeling the weight of the words that just reached your ears. Something has changed, but you can't quite define what it is. The idea of praying lying down never troubled you until now, but something inside you knows this is more than simple ignorance. What if it's true? What if this practice actually triggers the end? You can no longer ignore the shadow forming over you, over the church, over the world. The question echoes in your mind. Did Pope Leo XIV know something no one else did? Pope Leo XIV has always been an enigma, a deeply religious man, yet mysterious. He rose to the papal throne with promises of renewal, with hopes of restoring true faith to the heart of the Church. But as the years passed, his worldview grew darker and his decisions more unsettling. The reforms he introduced, supposedly to bring the Church closer to God, began having the opposite effect. He was increasingly distrusted by the cardinals and the masses, but there was something more behind his piercing eyes. You remember one of the Pope's early declarations, when in a moment of vulnerability, he spoke of the end times and the true nature of evil. What did he mean? His words carried a supernatural intensity that still makes the Church tremble. Pope Leo XIV spoke in riddles, but his language had a prophetic weight that could become terrifyingly real. He revealed deep secrets, which, if exposed to the public, could forever transform the way the world sees Christianity and salvation itself. But what was the real reason Leo XIV sought to control the act of prayer? In the Vatican's secret archives, there are records pointing to an ancient mystery. In old texts, there are mentions of the correct position for prayer, something that, for spiritual leaders of the past, seemed to be among the greatest secrets of the faith. What did they know that we didn't? Why could lying down to pray be the key to the final prophecy? This isn't just a simple physical act. The act of lying down to pray, seemingly harmless, is tied to ancient meditation practices where body posture is fundamental to accessing spiritual dimensions beyond human understanding. The problem is that by assuming this posture, something else may be invoked, something that should never be awakened. Leo XIV knew this. That's why he secretly but precisely forbade the practice. No one knew the reason behind his direct orders, but those who disobeyed felt the consequences. A new interpretation of the scriptures began to emerge, one not present in ancient texts, something hidden between the lines, a doorway to the unknown about to be opened. And here lies the big question. What would happen if everyone knew what Leo XIV had discovered? What if this truth is closer than we think? When you lie down to pray, you are not merely bowing your head, you are surrendering yourself to something beyond human comprehension, without even realizing it. Are you prepared to face what comes next? The Church is no longer a place of peace and safety. On the contrary, it has become the ground where unknown forces hide, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. What you are about to discover about Pope Leo XIV's words may change your destiny forever, and perhaps the destiny of humanity. The silence in the Vatican is heavier than you can imagine. It always lingers, hovering, as if everything is about to explode. There is something darkly true in Leo XIV's words, something hiding behind the Church's golden curtains, something few have dared to investigate. The idea that the mere posture of prayer could be the key to something so devastating seemed unthinkable. But now you find yourself reflecting on it, trying to piece together this puzzle. Something else is at stake. Lying down to pray is not a new act. Ancient cultures, such as the Egyptians and even some Eastern traditions, understood that body posture could affect the spirit. The lying position was seen as a way to connect with invisible forces, a way to open oneself to the beyond, to what the eyes cannot see. But what did those cultures know that we didn't? In Christianity, however, prayer was always done with respect and reverence, standing with the head held high as an act of humility before God. Lying down seemed like a disrespectful action, as if one were surrendering to sleep or indifference. But what Leo XIV discovered was something much deeper. He knew that something about lying down could disturb the spiritual balance of the soul, something that could lead to a revelation beyond our capacity to handle. There are rumors, echoing through the Vatican's walls, that Leo XIV began studying ancient Christian texts that spoke of spiritual portals. These texts weren't in the Church's official books, but hidden manuscripts covered in dust, buried deep in the secret libraries of the Vatican. These documents spoke of the transition of souls and how, in certain postures, the human body could open up to something beyond known reality. These texts spoke of the gate of God, but at the same time warned of the danger of opening that gate unprepared. Leo XIV, with his sharp mind and intense spirituality, understood that something was about to happen. He knew the Church was on the verge of a great revelation. It wasn't a revelation of goodness, but something that would bring about the end times, if man could not control the spiritual portals being opened. And then you ask yourself, was this gate of God really opened when people began praying lying down? Was the simple act of lying down to pray what began unveiling the hidden truth in the sacred texts? And was the Pope trying to stop the apocalypse from being triggered? The answers are more complex than you ever imagined. Leo XIV wasn't merely trying to reform prayer, he was trying to prevent a catastrophe. Deep down, he knew the key was right there in front of us, in our daily practices, something that could, once and for all, reveal the truth the Church had hidden for centuries. Now, a question hangs in the air, a question that cannot be ignored. Are we prepared to face what this truth will bring? The heat of doubt begins to spread like a dark flame through your mind. With each step you take deeper into this mystery, the sense of discomfort grows. You feel as if an invisible curtain has been lifted, revealing something you were never meant to see. Every word you hear about Pope Leo XIV's truth seems to intertwine with a reality you never imagined. But what exactly is that truth? What did he know? And more importantly, what did he fear? The days that followed the Pope's decree were marked by growing tension. In the Vatican's corridors, whispers began to spread, hinting that something monumental was about to happen. The Pope, always silent, avoided speaking about what he truly knew, but his actions became increasingly enigmatic. Every decision he made seemed driven by a dark urgency, something no one, not even those closest to Leo XIV, could understand. The secret texts he studied in the darkest hours of night were not merely theological reflections or doctrinal thoughts. They spoke of something deeper, something that transcended time and space. These writings, penned by those who tried to comprehend the ways of faith and the beyond, revealed portals, cosmic forces, and most importantly, a warning. Certain human actions could tear open fissures in the fabric of spiritual reality, allowing forces beyond comprehension to invade our world. The most disturbing discovery was that one of these actions, seemingly simple and innocent, was lying down to pray. An act that, in its simplicity, seemed harmless, but according to Leo XIV's findings, was linked to an ancient and forbidden tradition that connected humans to what lies beyond the veil. A tradition that the earliest guardians of the faith tried to eradicate over centuries, now more than ever revealing itself as the key to something that should have remained hidden. When Leo XIV forbade this practice, it wasn't out of whim. He feared that opening these portals would drag humanity into a dimension of darkness and chaos. He knew that the ancient texts, if followed strictly, could unveil truths so devastating that they might destroy the world's spiritual balance. But the Pope didn't just try to restrict the practice, he embarked on a desperate quest for answers. Who else knew about this? What other religious leaders were aware of this truth? And more urgently, what would happen when all the portals were finally opened? As the Pope delved deeper into his research, he began to realize that the truth he sought was closer than he imagined. The answer was within the Church itself, in its doctrines, in its rituals, and alarmingly, in the daily practices of the faithful. Praying while lying down was just the tip of the iceberg. If people knew the real reason behind this posture and the hidden power it held, the world would never be the same. Leo XIV faced a dilemma. By trying to suppress this practice, he was in some way postponing a destiny that already seemed sealed. Yet he also knew that the Church carried a responsibility far greater than he himself could grasp. He had to keep the truth hidden a while longer. But the weight of this responsibility was beginning to crush him. And now you ask, could this truth truly be more dangerous than we imagine? What could be waiting behind the spiritual door the Pope so feared? The empty halls of the Vatican echo with hurried footsteps, but inside Leo XIV, a deep silence consumes him. He cannot escape the revelations that haunt him at night. On every page of the ancient texts he unravels, a new layer of mystery is revealed. The truth, which once seemed a mere myth, now takes shape before his eyes. And with it, a growing weight, something he fears more than death itself, the final prophecy. You begin to understand that the reason Pope Leo XIV feared lying down to pray wasn't merely because it was a discredited practice, but because of something far darker and deeper. He knew that humanity, by submitting to that posture, was unknowingly preparing for an event that would forever alter the course of history. The lying posture wasn't just a physical act. It was the key to a spiritual transformation, a portal that allowed man to connect with something far beyond his comprehension. After much study, Leo XIV found in ancient Gnostic sects and apocryphal writings, dating back to the early centuries of the Church, mention of a great awakening. These texts spoke of an era of revelations when the veil between the human world and the spiritual world would become too thin to ignore. What these ancient texts suggested was that humanity, by adopting unknown or incorrect spiritual practices, could trigger the awakening of something beyond human control. In his research, Leo XIV found something even more disturbing. He came across references to enigmatic figures known as the Keepers of the Key. These were beings from another dimension, ancient and immortal, who had the power to influence humanity's fate, provided the spiritual portals were opened correctly. These entities, according to the scriptures, were asleep, waiting for the right moment to awaken, and what Leo XIV discovered, to his horror, was that this right moment was much closer than he had ever imagined. Praying while lying down, as he soon realized, was a practice used for millennia by those seeking to open the way for the awakening of the keepers. A simple movement, yet extremely dangerous. When a believer lies down to pray, their mind and body become predisposed to receiving a much stronger spiritual energy than that of regular prayer. This posture not only weakens the body's natural defenses, but also the spirit's, allowing the unconscious to connect with forces beyond our understanding. Now, Leo XIV knew something was approaching. The consequences of letting this practice spread among the faithful would be disastrous. If the Pope could not control the growing wave of lying prayer, humanity, unknowingly, might be creating the opening for the final awakening of the keepers, the revelation of a new cycle of destruction and rebirth, one that the Church, with all its traditions and dogmas, could not contain. You feel somewhere deep inside you a growing unease. What is being revealed now, at this very moment, may not be a warning just for Pope Leo XIV, but for all of us. Perhaps lying down to pray is only a reflection of a broader practice we've been ignoring. If the Church and the Pope himself were fighting against a force no one else could see, you ask yourself, are we truly ready for what's about to be revealed? The truth, as you'll soon realize, may be more terrifying than any prophecy ever written. The weight of the revelation becomes unbearable. Leo XIV begins to realize that the battle he's fighting is not just against external forces, but against something much darker and more ancient, something embedded in the very foundations of the Church itself. He knew the danger was imminent, but now he feels the proximity of the truth with an overwhelming intensity. The Pope, a man of faith and prayer, faces a dilemma. The faith he sought to protect now feels like the very thing imprisoning him. He tried to prevent chaos, but his own actions were becoming part of the cycle he feared. What was he supposed to do? Leo XIV understood that the Great Awakening was inevitable. The keepers of the key were about to awaken, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. What he could do, however, was try to control the process, to keep it from destroying everything. But as the days passed, he felt he was fighting a destiny already written. The key to the end of days, to the final revelation, was closer than he had ever imagined. And you, standing at the edge of this abyss, begin to understand that Leo XIV's truth was not merely a matter of religion or spiritual discipline. What he uncovered was ancient knowledge, a hidden secret that had been kept for millennia within the walls of the church. This secret involved not only lying prayer, but something much deeper and more powerful, something that, if unleashed, could forever change the course of humanity. You begin to see that the Pope wasn't just trying to protect the future of the Church, he was trying to protect you. The final prophecy wasn't only about the end times, but about the revelation of a truth buried beneath the deepest layers of human history. And at some point, all of us would be forced to confront that truth, whether we wanted to or not. Praying lying down, which once seemed like an insignificant act, was in fact a portal to the unknown. It was a key that, when turned, released a power that could both save and destroy. Leo XIV knew that humanity, by continuing this practice, was preparing for an encounter with something beyond comprehension. And now, the Pope knew what was coming. He knew that if the practice wasn't contained, the awakening of the keepers of the key would be inevitable, and with it, the end of the world as we know it. But at the same time, he feared that if he tried to contain the process, humanity's spiritual nature itself might be corrupted. He was trapped in a dilemma without resolution. You begin to realize that in some way the Pope wasn't just trying to protect the Church, he was trying to protect you. He knew that, in the end, all of us would face the same choice. Could it be that when we lie down to pray, we are unknowingly opening ourselves to the final awakening? And if so, are we prepared to face the consequences of that awakening? Before you can reflect further, the question returns, this time darker than ever. Could the truth, even the most terrifying one, be on the verge of being revealed to everyone? If that truly happens, the world will never be the same again. Like this video, comment with which city you're watching from, and share it with those who need to know what is coming. Time seems to have warped. Days and nights are no longer measured by the clock, but by something much more primal, something that echoes in the depths of the soul. Leo XIV, trapped in his desperate search for answers, feels he is approaching the brink of a great revelation. Every step he takes in the catacombs of the Vatican, every text he examines, brings him closer to the truth he feared the most. It was not just a matter of ancient secrets or forgotten practices. It was not just about controlling lying prayer. It was about something much greater, something that transcended any doctrine or religious institution. The Pope knew he could no longer ignore what was right before his eyes. He began to understand the Church's role not only as guardian of the faith, but as a bridge between humanity and cosmic forces beyond comprehension. When he discovered the ancient manuscripts written by those who called themselves the Keepers, he realized that the Church, throughout its history, had been manipulated to fulfill a much darker role. What Leo XIV could not reveal, what no one knew, was that the Church had been formed in part to prepare humanity for something that would go beyond the apocalypse. The true mission of the Church was far more complex. It existed to guard the gate between the human and the divine. But more than that, it was a tool to contain forces that could destroy all of creation. And what Leo XIV feared more than anything was the idea that these portals could be irreversibly opened. In seeking the truth, he began to see a thin line between faith and destruction, a line he was now forced to cross. And what he discovered, with growing horror, is that humanity, by praying lying down, was unknowingly breaking the barriers between these two worlds. Every lying prayer, every seemingly innocent gesture was attracting the attention of the keepers, those who had been asleep at the threshold of the universe, waiting for the moment to awaken. These keepers were not mere spiritual beings. They were the ancient watchers of creation, beings that held deep knowledge of the cosmos and mankind. But their awakening did not mean salvation. It meant destruction. They had been imprisoned in parallel dimensions, far from human reality, and lying prayer, for some unknown reason, was unlocking the key to their release. Leo XIV saw in a revelatory vision that lying prayer was not just an ancient practice. It was a ritual the keepers had once used to connect with humans, and when people lay down to pray, they were involuntarily invoking these beings from another dimension. The Pope didn't know if he had the power to stop their awakening, but he knew the Church could not afford to let what was being unleashed come through the gates. Now immersed in this secret, you begin to understand the depth of what is being revealed. What seemed like a simple Christian tradition, a form of prayer, is in fact the key to something far more terrible. And now the question is not just whether the Church should contain the practice, but what must be done to prevent the awakening of the keepers. The Pope knew that any wrong move could bring absolute chaos. You feel the weight of this truth pressing against your chest. What we are beginning to understand is that the apocalypse may not be a matter of physical cataclysms, but of a spiritual awakening of forces that can consume everything around them. The true battle will be between humanity and the forces that Leo XIV feared more than anything. And now you are part of this revelation, part of a secret so deep and ancient that it could change everything you know about the world and about faith. The truth begins to materialize more clearly for Leo XIV, and with each passing day, the pressure on his shoulders intensifies. He knew that the Church, as an institution, had been created to protect humanity from forces beyond comprehension. Forces that were now being drawn into the world through a practice the faithful never imagined. But what no one knew was that this lying prayer was not merely a physical posture. It was a key that opened a spiritual portal. When men lie down to pray, their consciousness weakens, allowing something to infiltrate. The keepers of the key, ancient and powerful beings, were being awakened, and that did not mean salvation, but rather the opposite. Destruction. Leo XIV, now fully aware of the imminent danger, felt that time was running out. The veil between the physical and the spiritual world was growing ever thinner. If the Church didn't act fast, the keepers would be released, and the apocalypse would begin. But how could he stop a force he barely understood? The question echoed, was it already too late to stop what had already been set in motion? Leo XIV knew time was against him. As the weeks passed, he felt that the Church's ability to act was becoming increasingly limited. He had tried everything, secret letters to cardinals, meetings with the highest clergy, but the truth was that evil had already begun to infiltrate. The awakening of the keepers wouldn't be something the Church could contain with mere words or decrees. Something more needed to be done. The revelation the Pope found in the ancient texts spoke of a ritual, a final effort to keep humanity away from the abyss. But the execution of that ritual would require a sacrifice. Leo XIV knew that in performing this act, he would not only risk his own life, but place the very destiny of the Church at stake. What he discovered, however, was that the sacrifice was not merely physical, it was spiritual. A church leader, someone with genuine spiritual power, would have to offer their soul at the threshold of the unknown to keep the keepers at bay. And for that, lying prayer had to be eradicated. There was no other choice. But as the Pope tried to find a way to avert the chaos, he felt that the evil was being fed with each passing moment. Lying prayer, simple and seemingly harmless, was empowering the very thing he feared most. Something was approaching, and he could feel it. What the Church didn't know was that with each prayer, a crack widened. The keepers were near, very near. Leo XIV was exhausted, but determined. He knew the moment to act was approaching rapidly, but what he had left to give was running out. The Church was in crisis. The Pope was fighting something he didn't fully comprehend. Every step he took to try and contain the darkness seemed futile. The keepers were about to awaken, and the sacrifice needed to prevent the chaos was becoming clearer with every night he spent in prayer, studying the ancient texts. However, one idea began to take form in his mind, a desperate solution, perhaps the only one capable of protecting humanity. Leo XIV decided that if lying prayer truly was the key to the awakening, he would have to destroy it at its root. It was not enough to forbid it. He needed everyone to understand the gravity of the situation. The world needed a radical change, and the Pope knew this would require courage. But as he prepared to act, the darkness closed in. He felt it, deep inside, as if the earth itself trembled beneath his feet. The keepers were moving beyond the limits of what he could control. They weren't waiting for the Church's signal. They were coming, no matter what. That night, Leo XIV entered the Vatican chapel, surrounded by shadows. He knew he could wait no longer. Lying prayer, as he had always feared, was not just a posture. It was the key to the final cycle. And before the dawn came, he would do what was necessary. The chapel was dark, wrapped in a heavy, crushing silence. Leo XIV, now standing before the altar, felt the full weight of what he was about to do. He looked at the lit candles around him, their flames trembling in the nearly imperceptible breeze. Each one represented a life, a prayer, and at the same time, each flame was a reminder of what he was trying to prevent, the awakening. The final cycle was about to begin, and the only way to stop the forces beyond comprehension from taking over the world was to sacrifice the very soul of the Church. The Pope knew this. He also knew that his sacrifice would not be merely physical, it would be spiritual, something that transcended the limits of human understanding. Leo XIV stood at the edge of the abyss, and he didn't know what awaited on the other side. But he knew that if he didn't do what had to be done, the awakening of the keepers could bring about the end of humanity. He had seen enough to understand that nothing else mattered. What he was about to do was not just to save the Church, but to preserve the world as we know it. Lying prayer, with all its implications, had to be eradicated, and for that he would offer himself as the final sacrifice. As he closed his eyes and began to pray, the strength of his faith became visible. The presence of something divine was felt, a light that seemed both welcoming and threatening. Leo XIII knew he was face to face with the truth, but something strange happened. As he prayed, the air around him began to change. The darkness did not dissipate. Instead, it grew denser. He felt the presence of the keepers, closer than ever. They were aware of his prayer, conscious of the barrier he was trying to establish, and then something broke. With a silent scream, the Pope felt his soul ripped from his body. He found himself in a plane beyond life and death, where the keepers watched, indescribable immense forms hovering all around. They were free, but Leo XIV, with his final prayer, had created a barrier, a thin line that kept them from fully entering. He had sealed the gateway, but at a terrible cost. The truth, as he had always known, was that humanity could never truly escape the cycle. Every prayer, every act of faith, every human movement had the potential to open portals to the unknown. But now, at least for a time, he had held back the chaos. The awakening was interrupted. The Pope became the key, and his soul, now lost on the edge of existence, held the final barrier against the keepers. What Leo XIV had done was not a victory, but a temporary suspension. What he sacrificed was more than his life. He sacrificed the very essence of his soul to keep the end at bay. And you, who now know the story, are faced with a choice. Will you continue praying the way you always have? Or will what Leo XIV did become the reflection of your own spiritual decision? The keepers are still there, waiting. The cycle continues. And now, the final question. Are you prepared for what comes next? Like the video, comment which city you're watching from, and share it with those who need to know what's coming. This is the end of our journey, or perhaps the beginning of something much deeper.